welcome back to the DeFi Summit. I'm Shira Lazar. I am the founder of What's Trending. We cover social and digital culture. I am so excited for this panel right now. We have some amazing speakers. We're talking about NFTs and fashion and the evolution of culture and fashion in a digital first world. Joining me right now, please welcome Emma Jane MacKinnon-Lee, who is the founder and CEO of DIGITALAX, the pioneer digital fashion NFT protocol and marketplace for gaming, esports, and the metaverse. Thanks for being here, Emma Jane.
Thank you for having me, Shira.
Next up, we've got Eugene Kan, a Hong Kong-based creative. Born in Canada, by the way, I'm a fellow Canadian from Montreal. Nice. And he is the former editorial director at hypebeast.com, which is really amazing. Most recently, Eugene co-founded Matter, an NFT foundry and agency in partnership with his partner Engine, which aims to help brands transition into this emerging and revolutionary channel. Finally, we've got Drew Harding, MetaFactory founder. And it's a community-owned culture studio and marketplace focused on the creation and sale of physical goods that celebrate crypto. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So I guess, let's start with, what is exciting you each in this space? Why was this a space that you wanted to get into? And specifically fashion as it relates to NFTs.
Yeah. I can maybe field that question first. So for me, coming from media, back around 2017, 2018, I started looking into what was sort of the next generation of media, because coming from fashion media, I think there was a lot of things that were overlapping there. And I think that when you look at fashion as a whole, there's so many things that are very much on the pulse of just where culture is in terms of communities, what's sort of the zeitgeist of today. And I think that was the initial genesis and getting involved and getting interested. Fast forward to now, I think obviously there's a lot of things that have happened since 2017, 2018. We all kind of saw what happened at the beginning of the year and where we're going now going forward. I think that the introduction of a lot of new players and just the technology catching up in a way has really provided a lot of opportunity for us to explore different things. I think even the stuff that we're looking at or we're interested in, or maybe things that even, let's say, 12 months ago, we're more of well, let's wait for technology to catch up before we are able to actually jump in and execute a particular vision or an idea.
Yeah, for me, I come primarily from the DAO space, working in Ethereum ecosystem for 4+ years now, full time. And it kind of happened to me from doing the conference circuit. I one day woke up and realized my entire wardrobe consisted of swag from conferences and various company shirts and project shirts. And we were actually out in Osaka for DevCon in 19. And we were talking about it, a bunch of friends staying at a hacker house, the Metacartel DAO, and talking about we could do better. Instead of the typical plain shirt with a stamp logo, mainly promotional, we should actually start to highlight and pull culture into garments and fashion. And at the same time, around that time, NFTs were starting to bubble up, especially from the artistic standpoint. And, we started to look at, well, we could actually give, these artists a new medium with apparel, with fashion, and have them extend beyond that. The idea of wearables had just started to emerge through crypto voxels and Decentraland. To Eugene's point, it was kind of this confluence of the tech has arrived and enabling these possibilities, as well as this, fashion and merch as being a really powerful vehicle for celebrating community and building community. Recognize there's probably an opportunity here, and just like any other subculture, we could create an opportunity for us to celebrate what we're doing, what we're building, and the rest is history, really.
Yeah. So from my side, I'm a bit of a Web3 maximalist. I would say I really believe in decentralization and just the principles behind it. And last year, I became really interested in fashion, and particularly digital fashion, and was kind of looking at the intersection of, okay, where is this going for the future when we think about the metaverse, when we think about gaming, VR, just all of these kind of 3D immersive technologies. And the more I looked into it, I was like kind of twofold, like, wow, this is just 1000% inevitable. It's the future. And why isn't anyone kind of looking at it? And then the other side was really seeing that, which was really the fact that no one really is looking at it. And when they are, they're looking at more from the perspective of like a traditional advertising or exploitative model, where it's like, okay, how can we just kind of freelance 3D models of digital fashion, say, and then sell these to bigger brands, or have kind of bigger brands hire us, and then we put this kind of in an ad for the public. So it was kind of boring. And then when I was looking at it, it was really from the fact of, well, if metaverse is true, then fashion is so intrinsic to that. I mean, it's been around for thousands of years, and it will continue to be just part of our human nature. When we think about self-expression and identity, and how do we actually kind of individualize ourselves. And so from that point of view, and having kind of the background in Web3, it was like a very unique but essential crossover. And it was coming from the perspective of, okay, how can I actually build something in this industry that really promotes and supports digital fashion designers, that supports building an ecosystem for developers, designers, players to come together, and then be able to transact within this space and generate value.
That's awesome. I think that what's also fascinating is, people look at this like, oh, it's just virtual and NFTs. But what I find when it comes to fashion, you can mix in the offline world as well. So how are you each doing that, and how do you see that as being part of the future? Emma Jane.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love the digital side and purely digital, because I just do believe that the kind of flexibility and optionality of potentiality, and then also just where things are headed, there's a lot to that. And I think that it really hasn't been looked into or completely kind of mapped out. It's just about how many opportunities there are, not just from a design perspective. When you think about, digital fashion, you can do so much more with than just physical pieces. But then when you think about sustainability, streamlining supply chains, there's just a lot to that. So really excited on that side. But definitely the hybrid kind of digital physical side is interesting as well, because that's an onboarding route in a sense, or a ramp to how do you actually get the traditional fashion industry operating within the metaverse, or a metaversal ecosystem. And so that's something that we've looked into more recently with DIGITALAX. We actually just launched our drip line, which is like a hybrid digital physical fashion line. And it's using NFTs as kind of the licensing, and everything we do is open source, but as kind of this, how do we streamline licensing, rarity, and then authentication of the actual design point of view between the physical and the digital components. So we're breaking that down very much to a pattern level, rather than just thinking, okay, how do we replicate, say, a physical fashion item in a 3D digital model? So that's really the perspective that we're taking.
Yeah. If I could answer next, I actually have a bit of a sort of different take to what Emma Jane said. I actually think that in general, I believe that a lot of the strength and adoption lies in the hands of existing brands that come into the space. And that the reason why is not actually because of the underlying technology or anything like that. It's more so the business of building a fashion brand is not as straightforward as just design, so much as everything that comes with it. It's obviously the brand, the story, the aesthetics, the continual need to just design. Well, how do I put this? The need to create clothing on a particular schedule. And I'm not saying a particular fashion schedule, it's so much as the actual process of continued creativity actually requires some sort of existing structure around it. And I think that's why I personally find it really interesting to see brands come into the space who already are maybe, on year one, they are a traditional t-shirt brand, right? And I think that what's important and valuable with that is that they're doing it and they have existing distribution. And the one thing that I was actually going to ask based off of your previous comment there, Emma Jane, was there's something interesting about the physical world where it is inherently sort of interoperable in a way where I can wear a t-shirt to the movie theaters, home, wherever. And I think that's the one thing that we've yet to really I don't know how we're exactly going to solve it in terms of having that portability between all the spaces, but I think that's the one thing that is valuable in terms of developing this online offline relationship between the two. And like for me, I think that there's amazing things that are being done by sort of these digital native brands, but I also think that on the flip side, brands that already exist in the physical space have the distribution of being in a wholesale setup where they're in, let's say 30 doors worldwide, 300 doors worldwide. And I think utilizing that as the on-ramp is my personal take on it. But I also think that depending on scale and size, like there really isn't any right or wrong answer in terms of how people build a brand. It's just so much like coming from my world of hypebeast, like I see these brands as sort of, in some ways, within the world of streetwear already on the cusp of sort of like innovation, or they've always been innovative. This is now an opportunity for them to kind of enter, but they can do it in a way that allows them to sort of enter from a different perspective.
Sure. Maybe I can just reply to this. I mean, I think it's interesting, but I agree that actually it's more the independent designer base that has a bigger play in when we think about the future. I really don't believe that bigger brands have a place so much. I mean, they do, but I don't think, definitely not with the current model. I mean, if you look at the current fashion industry, it's heavily weighted and asymmetric to one side, where it's like the top 20 brands or something. I mean, my numbers may not be exactly right, but the top 20 brands, they take like 80% of the entire industry's profit and revenue. And I think that that's the old model. That's the Web 2 kind of extractive, exploitative model where you have to have a brick and mortar store to classify as having like distribution channels. But I see the future where, this is the whole thing. It's that we're all creators. And when we think about the metaverse, particularly built on Web3 and what NFTs and crypto and just the whole kind of Web3 ecosystem enables, it's all about miniaturizing these walls and these kind of gatekeeper models so that anyone can be considered a designer. I mean, I could go online now and I could say that I'm a designer because I am, in a sense, and I'm creating all the time, just like so many of us are. So I really think that is more of the future. It's not looking at it from the traditional perspective of you have to be a brand because you know this or you know that or you have this behind you. And that's really what I'm focused on is how do you actually build infrastructure, which is like what you said, it's very important. You need to have infrastructure that can actually support that and create those streams. And that's where interoperability is incredibly important. And that's not just from a technical perspective of, how do you actually port a 3D model that's built in one game engine into another and have it run seamlessly from animation point of view or reducing artifacts, but it's also how do you actually create incentive models. And again, why crypto is kind of so amazing for this is how do you actually create incentive models that can support an entire ecosystem of designers and developers to collaborate and work together from a purely independent basis as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Emma Jane, on this. I don't think big brands are the ones that will be the leaders or the winners out of this. I see how most of them are actually approaching NFTs generally, and they seem to be missing the mark in terms of like what these things really unlock and what the power of them are. A lot of the approaches, auctions, sales seem to be more money grab driven than culture inspired and culture building. I also believe that what we're doing in the Web3 space, and most of us who are like native to it, have a perspective on both the technology and the potential for this stuff in disrupting culture that a lot of these brands haven't even begun to like wrap their head around, at least from the Web3 perspective. I'm a technologist. I've learned much about the fashion industry through kind of this work with MetaFactory. And, to Emma Jane's point, the weakness in supply chains, the exploitation through those supply chains, the big brands basically lead the narratives, the luxury brands who pile together all their existing inventory and burn it up because they're so worried about scarcity. These things are just, our ethos from the Web3 perspective were, can we apply this actually to legacy fashion, both how things are made and produce, the supply chain, rewarding the various individuals along the value creation chain, including the garment makers, the pattern makers. And we've structured our entire approach, organization, project around this by acting as a DAO, right? So not only are we facilitating the ability for independent designers and creators to come in and work with us and take advantage of this opportunity, but they're able to directly participate in the upside and the ownership, and therefore the direction that this brand takes. In a traditional brand sense, it's also typically very much about like, how do we control this narrative? How are we very specific about how we're perceived in the marketplace and what our users think about us? And for us, it's the direct opposite. Like, we're intentionally amorphous. Like, our logo is a changing robot face. It's intended to be, the values of which are intended to be directed and dictated by our community through proposal, through governance, through all these kind of mechanisms which we've built in. To the kind of original question too, we are physical first from a merch standpoint, and we believe that's actually really powerful. We think that it starts with something as simple as, that's a rad shirt. I want to buy it. I want to own it. And now I've received a token, which allows me to participate in the governance and essentially gives me a sense of ownership in this thing. I've now received an NFT. Well, what's an NFT? It's a digital wearable in a virtual world. Well, what's a virtual world? So although, yes, we're packaging everything around this idea of offering and selling merch, what we're really doing is creating experience and offering experience. And a lot of that is learning and discovery of, what is Web3? What are all these nuances? What are all these tools and things that kind of interconnect and create that digi-physical bridge and the opportunity? So I think digital has probably the longer legs. There's more potential. There's a lot that we're just starting to learn what could be possible. But I think like the two interplaying, especially initially right now, in terms of building adoption and attention, are really important. And we've seen how the community just kind of goes crazy over like their favorite project hoodie or joggers or whatever it might be. And from just purely a subculture and community building standpoint, it's really powerful. Everyone wants merch, but no one really wants to go through the headache of doing it. So we kind of, that's the main thing we've done, is absorb a lot of that, like basically that cost and headache. So. Yeah.
It's so many interesting things here. I mean, when I think about merch, I think about how many industries, from musicians, artists, brands, take advantage of merch. How are you, I guess, getting the word out so that people who are in these spaces, maybe not the legacy brands, but are independent creators or people that really lean on needing these things, how are they finding these opportunities or these platforms? Like, are you just taking advantage of the niche communities right now? Do you not need to kind of branch out yet?
Yeah, for us, because we partner with and offer from everybody from like Sushi Swap to Uniswap to independent artists to social community tokens or other DAO merch. It creates kind of this marketplace which so many different communities are discovering other communities and other projects, because we're kind of like intermixing everybody. Also by the nature of kind of the tokenomics and how we do rewards distribution with our tokens to those communities. In some cases, those communities or brands will actually do their own token drop for everybody who bought the merch too, like Sushi did that. We can do token permission drops. So it's actually creating discovery of projects and other communities that wouldn't have actually been possible before. And we've been like very cognizant of doing that and avoiding trying to do kind of like our own brand stuff. We have some of that stuff coming now that like MetaFactory can kind of stand on its own, but it's really like, we see ourselves as helping to empower and build those communities and as like an amplifying force for maybe a marketing initiative or a drop or whatever it might be. So, and then, the incentive model behind it kind of aligns us in this positive sum kind of collaborative game, which is we've found to be a lot more beneficial and the upside much greater than the competition kind of legacy opinion and carve a moat and protect your brand kind of thing.
Yeah, for us, so we operate, when we started, it's really about reaching progressive decentralization. DigitalAX, it's a startup. We kind of work crazy hours and all around the clock. But I guess to to your point of like, how do you actually kind of promote or even onboard designers or even get them to understand, okay, all these crazy new opportunities and what does that look like? When I first started, and I mean, we started with as like a drop as in terms of an NFT drop for digital fashion designers on our marketplace. And I reached out to all these designers that had no idea about Web3, nothing about NFTs, crypto, Ethereum. But when I reached out to them, I didn't actually tell them that what they were kind of creating was for an NFT platform, because trying to communicate to them at that time, this was like September last year as well, when there was no NFT rush or any history like that. It really didn't create any value for them, or for them, it was like, okay, well, why does that matter to me? And the interesting thing was then after the drop and kind of the success of it, they all started becoming completely obsessed with crypto and Web3 and decentralization, saying, wow, okay, this really now has direct value to my life, to my sustainability, to where I kind of want to go. How do I actually level up and differentiate myself in this environment? So I think it's really the same thing. It's kind of at a stage where it can't just be like an overnight solution where you just come in and expect people to really understand, okay, or this is valuable for me, or this is why I should start interacting with this ecosystem. It's more about operating in a bit more of like an open bazaar, and over time progressing to be able to deliver value to them in a way that they can actually, for lack of a better term, but really eat it in a sense and understand, okay, well, this is exactly why this matters to me, or why I should be dealing in crypto, and why the current model is, completely wrong and extractive, and there's better out there that exists, and I can actually go down that pathway. So yeah, I think it's kind of a catch-22, that question, because we can try and put it in front of people as much as we want, but at the end of the day, and I think this is why NFTs are so revolutionary, because it wasn't just some complex DeFi financial mechanism, but for the first time it was like creators were actually seeing, okay, I can interact with Ethereum and with the blockchain and start getting direct value from that. So yeah, I think it's kind of a process in that sense.
Could I ask you guys a question in terms of like the overall openness of it? Is that at all detrimental when you just sort of open the gates to everybody at the very beginning, and there's like just an onrush of people coming in, or versus like being more selective or whatnot?
So, okay, yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to say,
I actually think it's a lot more, sorry, I actually think it's a lot more powerful. And the reality is, like, I actually think this is why it's really important to operate as a DAO for these things, especially when we're thinking about creating this open creator economy. That it, because DAOs equate to many different things, but the biggest thing is transparency. So it forces you to be transparent with the members and the participants of the DAO, but that also forces you to be transparent with the market and everybody else who's participating, even if they're just a consumer. And the reality is, like, when you're starting off, you're facing the 99-1 rule, right? 90% are going to be passive observers, 9% will maybe kind of casually participate, and 1% is doing everything. And this is typical of traditional internet communities, Web 2 like thinking and legacy problem challenge. But yeah, I think there's just an opportunity here for us to provide more to our community. Like, we see it as like an evolution of a lifestyle brand. Like, someone throws on Nike or Lululemon because they identify as being an athlete, and they're like expressing that by just wearing this brand. Well, let's evolve this from a passive participant and consumer to like an active one. And so now this person actually has a way to have a voice and participate in the governance and instilling values and whatnot. And as people start to see what that means and what that equates to in terms of their independence, the potential upside, the value they can earn, the ownership around this thing that they're helping to build, they can earn, the mindset starts to shift and the participation starts to pick up. So we're starting to see this really like accelerate in a substantial way at MetaFactory, where we're onboarding brand new designers and technicians and ops help and all this stuff. And it's great to see. There are definitely organizational challenges, and we're trying to figure these things out as we're building them. But I think it's a problem worth solving. And I think that there's more opportunity and upside than potential negative of doing so. Like, obviously coming from the DAO space and perspective, I really believe this is the future. And a lot of what we're focused on at MetaFactory beyond, digital fashion and NFTs and everything is really trying to rethink the future of work, and through that, the future of brands and what these things mean.
I can kind of speak to that as well. So I mean, definitely, like I said, a decentralized maximalist, but I do believe that sometimes there does need to be like a progressive decentralization. It can't just be like going into an open bazaar to start with, because that can have caveats, and particularly when it's a new community, if you rush it or it's done in the wrong way, it can end up backfiring completely or destroying what you actually set out to do. It needs to be kind of protected and supported in some sense. So, I mean, that's how we did it, is a progressive decentralization approach, and we're still on that roadmap to like complete and full like DAO decentralization structure. And I think that that's been really positive for us in terms of how we've been able to kind of operate as a cathedral in a sense internally, but still maintaining as much transparency as we can. And we do release like monthly transparency reports and everything's on chain. But at the same time, knowing that there does need to be a pilot kind of in the lead and to ensure that it doesn't kind of just dissipate, that there is a movement forward, because like Drew was saying, there is that evolution from like passiveness to an activeness. And at the start, it's really important. I think how I see it is not to be like overly have time anxiety or anything, but there is a time pressure that we do need to move fast. And for that to happen, working in a smaller group sometimes to then like iterate and get things out faster and set the right roadmap and course and infrastructure that then others can come and build on. That can't just be completely decentralized. There has to be some concentration of focus within that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like Eugene, has your focus been more with the bigger brands or companies that are trying to get in the space and kind of acting as a incubator for them? And what have you seen in terms of the opportunity and challenges? Yeah,
I mean, I think that there's a lot of underlying sort of like nomenclature, even just semantics, right? Like, what is a big brand? Like when I think big brand, obviously we could use a Nike and Adidas, but there's also, I think, that sort of middle tier of like owner operated brands that I think kind of like emanate from the world of streetwear. And I guess my pushback is that in general, like I think that when it comes to building that brand, I think that fashion itself is very core. I think there's a difference between creating a piece of merchandise that is reflective of the logo of a DAO or a project or whatnot versus like a fashion brand. And I think part of that comes down to inherently how you go and develop the social currency aspect of it. And I think that's the part that I'm kind of hanging my hat on. And I think that pushes against the way you guys look at it, in that for better or worse, fashion kind of plays to the inadequacies of people, right? Like if you look at why luxury fashion exists, it's kind of like tapping you on the shoulder, like, oh, the inadequacies of that. And we can all, obviously that can be a side conversation of whether that's right or wrong. But I think much of that is derived from sort of human behavior. But I think that the part that I see interesting is that as much as bigger brands or brands that come from an offline analog space are trying to enter versus being a digital first brand, I think that in general, it's more of a learning curve that once it's sort of like equalized, it's all kind of the same thing. And I think for them, it's like the value I see is the fact that they've had a brand with a built-in audience and community that people look to for trust. I think ultimately that's what we look at for brands, is like trust. And I think this is also sort of like, on the one side with Drew and Emma Jane, it's sort of the sort of Web 3.0 perspective. And then I have maybe a more like traditionalist, like, well, how do you build a brand and how do you like create something that is quote unquote desirable coming from the world of streetwear? And I don't think those two need to be like zero sum games, either this or that. It's more so like how one side of the room is going to approach the development of fashion in their space versus mine. Doesn't mean that only one option is going to work or win. Right. So I think that ultimately is one of the most interesting sort of perspectives around it. So going back to your original question, I think that whether it is a fashion route or it's just the ability to kind of position a social layer on top of NFTs, I think that ultimately is where most brands kind of want to be. Like, I don't know if that many brands in themselves care about, I'm going to mint an NFT that has like a pair of sneakers that spins on a 360 spinner. Right. I think it's actually a lot of stuff that Drew mentioned in terms of how do you open up experience for these people. And I had a call with like a big footwear brand today, and it was kind of like, I don't think they were that excited or interested on whether or not their shoes were going to be in the game because they were more on the sort of environmental side, but they were just more interested in like, how do I create a sense of community and tie that back to performance and people enjoying life together. So I think that's sort of like how I see it.
Sure. Maybe one thing to your point, though, the only thing I disagree is that I don't think that big brands or brands automatically equate to trust. And I think that's what is interesting.
I totally disagree, though. Like, why do you buy Nike, right? People buy Nike because they think it's going to help them run faster. They believe the branding or the story behind it is
sure, but I think that we're moving away from that now, though. That's the interesting thing, and that's what's so interesting about the infrastructure that Web3 enables, is that it provides transparency and trust for anyone. And this is why the independent designers within that ecosystem and framework, they have, I guess, much more potentiality to be able to establish their own brands, their own communities, or not brands, but their own kind of communities and reputations around themselves, and then back that up by code, in a sense, and transparent code, rather than today where it's really opaque. Like even Nike, trustworthy in what sense, though? In a sense that they have stores everywhere globally, or trustworthy in that you really understand their entire supply chain and their mission, their values, and kind of their whole operating ecosystem?
I mean, I think that there's two different arguments there. The one side, I don't disagree. I think Nike, any big sort of multinational brand probably has some sort of dirt, underneath the carpet. But I think that when we look at fashion at its very core, I'm buying fashion because there's an expected sort of exchange of what I get out of wearing a swoosh on my chest, or I wear those, Travis Scott Air Jordans. Like, I think that's sort of the sort of like social currency that lies at the very heart of fashion in general. Now, how does that translate into, I think, the digital world is like, I think it's actually a little bit more difficult, because if it's a pair of Nike running shoes that has proven that, you could run a near 2-hour mile wearing these shoes, there's a sort of performative, like, functional element to it. How does that translate to the metaverse? Is probably a little bit more difficult, because it's almost purely aesthetical driven, or more driven on aesthetics.
But I don't think the social currency side is definitely right, but I don't think it's limited just to brands, though, being able to build that. I think that's very like a age-old way of thinking of, okay, well, I've got to be a big brand in order to be able to establish myself.
Well, I don't think big brand is the
small
exact
brand,
sort of
medium
perspective.
brand.
Yeah. I think there's some. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that ultimately it comes down to like the argument that I think we're both having here is like sort of the values that people want in brands, right? I think on the one hand, you have people that are more than willing to give up convenience for the sake of, or give up privacy for convenience, right? Or people that just actually are looking for something from a brand, and other people that are looking for ethics, like a very ethical brand. And I think that for better or worse, everything can kind of be represented going forward. Like people will have different expectations from the brands.
I think a lot of people like wear a brand too because they think other people think it's cool. Like they wear it again. Yeah.
100%.
The social currency aspect, right? And like a lot of time that's within the purview of like some sort of a lifestyle. It could be athleticism. It could be gaming. It could be casual luxury, whatever it might be. And like, I'd argue that Web3 communities have some of the strongest communities, strongest ethos, values, and camaraderie. And really like all we're doing is kind of like merchandising that in a sense and providing an opportunity for them to now celebrate this subculture, which is so near and dear and all the values that come with it to us. Like, I really see it as no different than like the punk movement or the hip hop movement, where the fashion that emerged along with all the other artistic media was meant to celebrate that subculture. They weren't like doing it to become mainstream and sell their punk fashion to like, sure, these things happened and were co-opted and adopted by larger brands and whatnot. And then, yes, they become more like mainstream. But I kind of, that's how I see how we're looking at it from MetaFactory. It's like, we're trying to celebrate and promote this subculture and allow people to use this as a vehicle for like learning, understanding, and then hopefully subculture becomes culture, right? Also, to your kind of first point around like, slapping a logo on a shirt, like screen printing, shipping it out, versus, the intricate supply chains and manufacturing production processes that these existing brands have, they're stuck in a legacy mindset, and we're coming in from a completely different one, looking to like uproot and change these things. So we have a network of cut and sew fashion houses, boutique garment pattern makers. We're developing our own blanks. We can do everything from on-demand printing to embroidery to DTG to custom cut and sew fashion. I think 4 or 5 of our pieces so far have been completely custom ground up. So we're actually completely trying to rethink how these things happen and actually how we bring value to someone who, the garment maker or the pattern maker who created the blank, as well as the designer who created the design, as well as the buyer who bought it, and align all of them through, again, this governance token. And I think, you know, to the next step, like, can we decentralize production? Like, our end goal would actually be products that are ordered in Europe are produced and shipped from Europe. Ordered from the Americas, produced and shipped from the Americas. Like, these global supply chain, produce everywhere, ship around the world. This is not, it creates weakness in supply chain. It creates bloat. There's, like, again, I think it's easy to obfuscate where the value is coming from and created. So I think, yes, they have that tradition and they have the history of like how production and keeping these things. But I think where we win is bringing fresh perspective and our ethos into this space from a completely different perspective. So,
but maybe, yeah, to add to that as well, I mean, I don't think it's not that within Web3 or digital fashion, hybrid digital physical, traditionally physical, whatever you want to call it, that the like principles behind why people wear fashion changes, because that's also human nature. And I don't think that will ever change. I mean, go forward 100 years and it will be the same. We'll be wearing fashion for a lot of the same purposes. Sure, some of it will become more functional and there'll probably be like more stuff that we can do with it. But like down at the most intrinsic human nature level, those ideas of like, okay, repping your guild, which is very much like the merch side and what you're saying is like a brand. But really my perspective is that, and why Web3 and this digital fashion kind of NFTs and everything, why it's so revolutionary, it's that it's not that traditional mindset where you have to tick these boxes to be considered a trustworthy brand, which is how the market is seeing it now. What you're describing is, okay, you've got to have this, this, and this, and then you're considered a trustworthy brand. But in this new environment, it's actually breaking down and miniaturizing those walls in a sense, so that as an independent designer, you can come in and you can leverage off an infrastructure and you can build to then be able to create your own kind of guild or quote unquote brand, but not in that traditional sense. I think that's really where the distinguishing line is. It's not so much that social currency that will change within why we wear fashion, but it's that those that can enter, it won't just be limited to like, okay, you've got to do this, or you've got to have this certificate on paper to be considered good or trustworthy by the market. I think that's really what the point is. But
I guess my argument is like, is that something that's not possible right now in the real world? Like, does it?
It's very hard. Very hard.
But I think it's also equally hard in both worlds, though.
I think the legacy mindset and framework, the tradition, the patterns, the like mental models, the physical models that already exist as a brand, established brand, medium, large, you're just going to follow the playbook, right? Like there's no why mess with something that's working well for you. And I think like fashion generally and legacy fashion is kind of overdue for a shakeup. And I think that this mindset and kind of where we're coming from Web3 perspective can provide that in a way that's got to come from outside in. I don't think with like, and this is true of not just fashion, but most industries, it's typically doesn't happen from within the industry unless they're pushed to do so. Like their patterns and habits won't change. We've seen this, like fashion's still a problem. Luxury brand waste and excess still a problem, right? So like there's no motivation for them to change. We have to create the motivation for them to keep up with us, essentially.
I love this. This is like the point of this, to have like a convo and different perspectives. So it's not like that typical Q&A. I love it, or panel. But I guess like as we wrap up, what do you each want to share? Where should people find what you're doing? What are you excited about? Like, is there anything you didn't get to share in terms of what you're up to before we go?
Yeah, I can go first. So where you can find us, actually our Discord channel is probably the best. So if you go on digitalax.xyz and then you just scroll down, you'll find our social media links, and our Discord's where really at the heart of our community and where we're building a lot of stuff out. So if you're like a designer or not, it really doesn't matter. Just anyone who has a desire to dwell in kind of the hybrid between the digital or physical and fashion and the metaverse. Then what we're building out is kind of some really interesting stuff. So I encourage you to join. And the best is the Discord. And then, I guess nothing too much to say, just that really it's exciting to be in Web3 and in fashion, because there's when you kind of are in it and that you see like how many problems there are in the current model. And I think that that's really the exciting thing around the current NFT rush, is that so many creators started realizing, holy crap, it's not just this one restrictive way. There's so much better out there, and I can actually start kind of taking that new roadmap. So I think the future is bright.
Eugene?
Yeah, I think overall, like, I really enjoyed this conversation because you had obviously two different sides that were kind of like not seeing eye to eye on certain things. I think that's obviously really important because I want to know what perspectives or blind spots I have, and like, you know, maybe I am a little bit antiquated in the way I look at things, so much as like, but also I was thinking about it a lot of like, man, maybe I'm like misinterpreting like what the actual challenge is, because I'm looking at it more from a perspective of, regardless if you're in this space or not, it's like, how do you start to build a brand, right? But I'm very happy to share the stage with these guys and kind of like understand where they're coming from, their perspective. So for us at Matter, you can check us out at itsmatter.io, itsmatter.io, and from there you'll see all of our social channels and whatnot. You can follow us there. And I look forward to just like keeping in touch with everybody and seeing where we're all at in 6 months, 2 years, etc.
Yeah, definitely echo your comments, Eugene. Is great perspective. I think panels where there's difference in opinion and perspective are like the most interesting, and I'd actually would love to continue the conversation with you and like understand your perspective, because again, technologist first, coming into fashion, learning. So yeah, I think it's like the entryway causes a lot of that. I think at its core, maybe the real question here is like, what is a brand, right? And like, what constitutes a brand? And I think like part of that kind of is being redefined to some extent as well. Or the whole point is letting it be constantly defined and redefined, right? So that's exciting. And Emma Jane, great talking to you. Really excited to see what you guys are up to and watch this whole space emerge. And for us at MetaFactory, the best place is probably also going to be our Discord. Come get involved, introduce yourself. If you want to get involved at a design, operational, whatnot level, all that opportunity exists as well. At the MetaFactory on Twitter as well is a great place to stay in touch with like what we're up to and or any drops that are upcoming and whatnot. And then, you know, what I'd say to people who are listening, watching, and interested is get involved in whatever way that it strikes your fancy. Especially like the DAO side and the communities that are opening or like providing an open path to participate and collaborate. Get involved. You know, you might be hesitant, but I think there's so many places for people to, you know, express themselves as creators, as non-creators, as developers, and you can really help kind of shape this stuff. We're still in the very beginning innings, and this is very nascent still. So yeah, you can put your hand, your thumbprint, your handprint on all this stuff and really reshape or shape rather the future of fashion and culture. So
awesome. Well, thanks again, Emma Jane, Drew, Eugene. I'm Shira Lazar. You can check me out at Shira Lazar everywhere. And thank you to DeFi Summit and all of you for tuning in and doing cool stuff. We hope that you're enjoying your time here and enjoy the rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks.
Guys.